Welcome to Taking the Tradition On. It's a series of conversations about oral storytelling with exceptional people. We're here for an hour of conversation. It's not a storytelling performance, though we're storytellers, so stories do tend to worm their way in anyway. We are currently on series 4, and the topic for this series is words in the works. It's all about applied storytelling. All previous episodes of this series and all the first 3 are up, freely available on my YouTube channel, Taking the Tradition On. If you like them, please do subscribe. And as ever, I need to say thank you to Get a Word in Edgeways Festival. This is their very posh Zoom account with the webinar function that they let me borrow for these sessions. So thank you very much to them. I'd like to say a particular thank you to my patrons who helped to make Taking the Tradition On happen, who've all been completely marvellous and even more supportive than usual of late. And I've got some new patrons to welcome. So hello, welcome to Carl Murray, Eden Mary, Josie Bazant, Ronnie Comboy and Lisa Schneider. Thank you very much for supporting what I do, Taking the Tradition On. You are very welcome, and great to have you on board. And if you would like to become a patron, then it's very easy to find. Just go to patreon.com/Amy Douglas. And there's obviously Taking the Tradition. You'll be the first to hear who I've got coming up as guests. And there'll be links to concerts and various other things that happen on that page as well. So tonight's subject and topic for Taking the Tradition On is storytelling and corporations, corporate storytelling. And it's with Dawn Ellis, who is a really distinctive and wonderful storyteller. She works with traditional storytelling in both traditional storytelling arenas, but also in the corporate world. She's passionate about equality. She tells a lot of stories about strong women and the divine feminine. I met her last year for the first time in the sort of cultural melting pot that is the Marrakesh International Storytelling Festival. And that's what I heard her tell. I heard her tell the really traditional stories. And so when I found out that actually a large proportion of her work is with business and in corporations, I was actually quite surprised. And I want to know more. So I'm going to ask you to go mad on the chat and give a lovely warm welcome to my fabulous guest. If I can find her. All the things flicking up on the screen. Keeps putting the toolbar down. Here we go. Welcome to the wonderful Dawn Ellis. Hurrah!
I loved it when you said, I was a bit surprised to find out she worked in business as well. I thought that's such a polite way of putting it. How is this woman, who I thought was quite an interesting woman, suddenly working in business?
Well, it's just, I suppose, I came into storytelling through a really folky route. I started in folk festivals. I started in little tiny storytelling clubs. And storytelling in that very nice kind of little niche world that is slightly on the fringes of everything. I mean, this isn't everybody's experience of storytelling. I don't know how much other people relate to this. But it's kind of, it's run by volunteers. Nobody gets paid very much. It's all done for the love of story and keeping the tradition going. And for me, kind of balancing that with the big sort of world of money and corporations and business is something that I struggle to get my head around a little bit. But on the other side of things, although maybe what I would call the traditional storytelling, oral storytelling world is quite small, everybody in the world is talking about storytelling these days. Every time a book comes out, the greatest storyteller of his generation. Every composer is like, what an amazing storyteller. Every dancer is an amazing storyteller. Everybody's an amazing storyteller. And I know that businesses are really concentrating and focusing on their narrative and trying to establish their story and their personality in the world of so many competing businesses. So I'm not surprised that they would be reaching out to storytellers, and we seem obvious people to work with them. So can you tell us what corporate storytelling means to you and a little bit more about what it involves? And I realise that obviously this is tonight is a personal look. It's about your work in the
Yeah.
corporate storytelling. Lots of people work in different ways. Liz is just saying, you know, she does lots of corporate storytelling as well. That doesn't surprise me, Liz. You are, I'm sure there's actually 3 of you to do everything that you do. You just work everywhere, and you are kind of, you know, the queen of storytelling, and you know, you're taking over the world by storm with storytelling, and we're all following in your footsteps because you're amazing. But tonight's going to be about you, Dawn, and your kind of particular focus on that.
Well, when you were talking about how you started, I was thinking I would love to do more festivals. I would love to do all of that, but because I came up through a slightly different route, I actually came up through theatre. So I was an actor for 20 years, and then it kind of spat me out. And I was looking for ways of using what I knew from acting to make some money, you know, basically. I mean, we know that, you know, the cash cow of storytelling is a bit of a fantasy in most of our lives. But so I'll answer your question. I won't be the politician and not answer your question. I'm going to answer your question.
I'll keep asking.
So basically, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking it means taking quite basic storytelling techniques into a completely new environment where people don't know anything about tension and release. You know, they've heard of the story arc, but they don't know it. They don't know how to apply it. So what it means is using, you know, I run workshops, as I'm sure you do, Liz, but I'd love to hear from, you know, what you do as well. But workshops in organizations, usually with intact teams. So either the insights team or the innovation team, and they're going, we need storytelling. And so I have long conversations with them before I go in, because they don't really know what they mean by storytelling. But as you were saying, Amy, it's a big buzz. It's a big thing at the moment. I mean, I have to say, when I first started doing it in business, which was 20 years ago, it wasn't such a big buzz. And I was the one who was insisting having it as an offer. And I'll tell you about how I got into it later. But I was going, no, storytelling is the thing. But it wasn't such a big thing then. What it means to me is literally bringing baby steps of storytelling techniques and finding out by lots of listening what they need, you know, what is it that they want so that they can apply it. So that's one thing I do. One of the other things is I use it for building teams in a completely different way. So I don't know how much you want to know, but maybe further down the line you can ask about. But that's what I mean by corporate storytelling, is literally, you know, tiny basic techniques.
And do you tell them stories?
I do when I'm doing the team building, but they don't. They get a bit. To be honest, it's a bit. They find it a bit daunting. So if I tell them stories, and I'm in a workshop, I will tell a very, very basic story, and in quite a simple way, because otherwise people who've already got in their minds, I'm not a good storyteller, I don't know how to do it, and then they see somebody telling a story and they think, well, I could never do that. So that, you know, so I tend not to use actual stories. I use basic storytelling. Yeah, I will tell basic stories, but I don't. What I'd love to do is be invited into an enormous conference and tell a world-changing story, and then get them all to change their minds about what they're doing. But so far, I'm not really asked to do that. I don't know why.
Don't need to persuade them. See, this is one of the things that puts me off, is that, so Maria's in the chat and she's going, I'm finding in my corporate work that they're very involved in paradigm shift and the kind of language we use to paint ideas through story. I often use a story to change an automatic truth. And I kind of read that and listen to that and go, it's just like so many buzzwords. And I suppose that's the thing that I love about traditional stories, really getting to the heart of things.
Yeah.
And stripping away the layers. It's going to be quite rude, but stripping away all those layers of crap, because like they're just like dressed up in kind of buzzword stuff that doesn't really mean anything and doesn't need to have quite such layers of convoluted language. And so this is me. I'm just
No, I'm with you.
I am going to be playing devil's advocate tonight. I mean, I'm not averse necessarily to storytelling in corporations, but I am going to be a bit.
But I am completely with you on that, and for the reason that it's the opposite of storytelling. So having business jargon to me is the opposite of storytelling, where you're getting to the truth of the matter and you're painting it in a simpler way as possible, but a simple and relevant way as possible. So so yeah, I think that, so what you're saying, I think, having the jargon in which they do have, of course, but I like to help them. I say, but what are you really saying here? What is it that you're saying? That doesn't make sense. It needs to make sense. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. So yeah, you have to try a bit harder if you're going to be more devil's advocate with it.
So if you have a really successful business relationship and a successful time working with a corporation, what do you think they normally want to get out of it? And what do you feel like you've accomplished? If you've accomplished something, what is it that you usually manage to do?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to divide it into two, if I may. So the people, for example, I sometimes get called and somebody says, you've been recommended, which is, a great way to be.
Always the best way to get anything.
Always the best way to get anything. We want storytelling support. And when I probe a bit harder, a bit deeper into it, it's they don't really know what they mean, but they know that they should be storytelling. So basically, so it's like people who whole teams who go, I think we need storytelling. But somebody has said we need storytelling, and then it's my job literally to be a consultant and really find out what they want and then adapt accordingly. And sometimes it's dissuading them from doing the thing that they thought they wanted. So for example, I have a client in Denmark, and they are very sort of intellectual, thrusting, business world types. It's a bank. It's not an evil empire, and they go, we need to get our narrative right. What's our narrative? And I'm going, what do you mean by that? Well, the narrative, we need to be aligned on our narrative. And basically what they're talking about is their purpose. They're not talking about their narrative, or they're talking about a strap line or something. So I need to get really clear what they think they mean, and then see if I want to do it or not. Because I'm not interested in PR at all. I'm anti-interested in PR, and I'm not really interested in helping people just get a, wordsmith something together if they don't have a reason to, if it's not something that I think is going to be interesting for me in a way. So that's one thing. I know you've got a question coming.
No, I was just thinking. I was thinking about what you said. So it is that thing of getting them in a room together to try and work out what they're all saying in slightly different ways in different language and figure out what that core purpose is. Because I'm assuming they're all going off in different directions. They've all got the different roles within the company, and actually agreeing what the purpose of their business is in order to share it.
Yes. So one of the things I work with is purpose. So I've been doing that for about 25 years on a sort of parallel trajectory, but of course it comes together completely in storytelling. So when I teach people storytelling, I make it really clear that the first step of structuring a story, which will have immense impact, of course, because it always does if it's done well, is the reason why they're doing it, and if it's just a small, it's a very narrow purpose, like because I need to get my targets for this month or whatever, I just say, well, that's not enough. You need to have a purpose involving engagement with other people, and a purpose to be genuine. I mean, actually, I didn't think we were going to get this deep into it, but here we are getting deep into it. So yes, I do get them in a room together to do that. And then I say, okay, your purpose is one thing, but you can be aligned on your purpose, but then you can use storytelling to engage other people in what that purpose is. And depending on the audience.
I would probably say into the nitty gritty of language, and I'm going to come back to what Maria Gillen has said. I suppose for me, the purpose would be maybe filling in your targets, but actually what they need is vision.
Well, we could have a discussion about this, but for me, purpose is why I do things I do. Okay. So for me, it's like, I'm doing this because I care about this. This is important to me, and I want that. So for me, purpose is the motivation towards the vision. Just to be clear about that. So can I just say the other way I use, you said, what do they want when they want storytelling? The other thing I do, which I absolutely love, is using storytelling for team building. So if, for example, you've got a new two teams coming together, or whatever stuff happens in business, in organizations, and they don't know each other and they're suspicious and all of that. I help them to generate their own mythology. So we create a story together using real events, but then, putting it into allegory. And they create the story of how they came together, and the ups and downs and the tensions, but not in everyday lumpen language, but in a sort of rather more elevated way, and what the bright future looks like. And they love it, because of course what they don't realize is that by using the imagery and the allegory, they are reaching so far deep down into their psyches and making the difference in a way that they don't even, we none of us realize it's happening to us until it's happening to us. And that's what I love doing almost better than anything else, because I tell their story back to them. And then they're listening and they go, even if it's something as simple as, and then the captain of the ship, jumped overboard with all the treasure. I mean, something ridiculous like that. And they go, yeah, that did happen. We remember when that happened. And then, so then they get bonded, they're kinder to each other, they understand each other because they then share the same story. So that's one of the sort of slightly alchemical ways of using it in business that I do. I prefer not to call it corporate in a way, because, well, I hate the word. and I grew up hating the world as a performer, and just thinking it's men in suits. But of course, when you get to know them, it's people with families. Anyway, sorry, Amy, that's probably
Don't go
too
anywhere
many
sweet for
words.
the weekend and complain about how their tie being too tight when they get dressed in the morning. Yeah, so we've got a couple of things coming up on the chat, and I mean, Ronnie's saying, "Oh, would you clarify what do you mean by more elevated way?" Well, hopefully we just have, Ronnie, and that kind of, I suppose, that putting it into metaphor. So taking it from the everyday into something that is in the metaphor, into the allegorical.
Yeah, well, instead of saying they were doing cutbacks and a lot of our team got sacked, and we dreaded the call from HR, which would be, it means much more to them if I say to them, well, what would that be, if you were making that into an image, what would it be? And they might say things like, well, there was a plague was happening outside, and a lot of us were being culled or whatever, and there was an atmosphere of real terror in there. And it makes it richer, but it also reaches what's really going on, which is the emotion that they're feeling during those experiences.
Well, that is one of the wonderful things about stories. It gives us a space to talk about what's going on in our lives without it being directly personal, and yet in some ways more deeply personal, so that you don't have to tell somebody exactly all your feelings, but you make it very, very clear by being in that other space.
Liz has got a really, would you agree, Dawn? Yeah, I do think it would be helpful, Liz, but I don't think it'll ever happen. Yeah, I agree with you. And maybe you can make that happen in the businesses you work in. I think
what this is saying is, if people can't read the chat, is yeah, would you agree that organizations can create better internal relationships if they just cut the jargon and help people better communicate with each other? And I suppose that is what you do when you put things into story. You put it into a way that touches our hearts, and makes us all able to do it. There's also kind of putting it into simpler language, but also kind of putting it into metaphorical language, connect with it in a different way.
Yeah, but I absolutely agree with you, because we take refuge behind jargon in lots of ways. And I think, Maria, you were saying, or somebody was saying, we do need to meet them with the language they use, which I agree. But in this particular example I'm using, I'm taking them away from the language they use, but also taking them away from their everyday language, and taking them into a different world, which with the purpose to help them understand each other better as humans. Weirdly, it's not weirdly, it's only weirdly if you don't understand about storytelling, but to have them go into this different world, but be in that world together with each other, rather than separated as disparate people who don't really know each other very well.
And I use jargon in you know, I do use jargon. We all do in different spheres. You have a specific language for a specific place. So yes, we need to meet them on that level. But also, if you're using that and you're with the same team of people all the time and you get very embedded in that language, then as a business, it makes it much harder for you to communicate with other businesses and with the outside world when they might have the same terms, but they use it in different ways. And it's so easy to miscommunicate when you have too much specialized language that you can't describe what you're doing without it.
Well, exactly. And Liz, just to, yeah, which you'll know from, I'm sure, the organisations you work in, but an extreme example is, yeah, well, I got together with the CLT and we were talking about the DLF project, and then the SOMAR came in and, you know, said, well, I'm the SIO on this, and really, and I'm going, that makes sense to nobody except yourself. You know, so, or maybe the person you're talking to, and it's very distancing. So yeah, that's one of the purposes, to try and bring it, deconstruct and then reconstruct in a different way, maybe.
So I've got lots of other questions, but
Yeah.
I don't know if we should stay in this area for a little bit if you want to talk about before I start niggling away. Do you want to tell us more about the team building, the other side of the thing that you wanted to
Yeah,
say?
well, I think I've started talking about that. I mean, the thrill I get from doing that is, I think it's the most noble, it's one of the most noble uses of storytelling, you know, applied storytelling, is um, is having people see their own lives from a different perspective, or from a new perspective, or a richer perspective. And so that you can not only get some distance, a little bit of distance, because you're not saying, you know, I was worried I'd be sacked. You're going, well, everybody was being thrown overboard on the ship that we were in, you know, in the storm or whatever, you know. So so it gives you a slightly different perspective, and it means that the people are all living in the same story for that short time, and once they've created the story together, with me heavily facilitating, because as you can imagine, if you say the word metaphor to some people, they're so unused, you know, that's not their language, so have to explain very simply, or say, what would it be if it was a whatever. So heavily facilitated, and then they get their story told back to them by me, and I love doing that because it's real. I mean, and it's telling the truth. You know, that whole thing about truth and story. You know, the whole relationship between truth and story, but it's telling them the truth. And so, and then, you know, to make it a full-on team building experience, I take a lot of dressing up clothes and masks and God knows what in, and I say, right, now you've got the story. You can go. You're going to perform it, and they go and plunder all the clothes, and you know, you can imagine the men dressing up as women, putting wigs on, and you know, it's what they like the best, and they go away feeling completely, you know, relaxed with each other, and imagining that performing it to each other was the main point, whereas in fact that was just them letting off steam. The main point was hearing their story told back to them in a way that really reached down into the roots of their you know, their beings, really. So I love doing that. It probably, I don't know if it's clear what I do, but you know, that's my favorite bit, really.
I think it sounds great, and I think it is clear to me. I'm hoping that people will jump in the chat if it's not clear to them. I think it sort of leads onto where I was going, and like Vince is saying, you know, retired senior manager here who specialised in changing the stories people tell themselves. I would be worried if we began to sound superior to the corporate people or to the specialist language that they used to speak among themselves. Well, that has been my experience with talking to lots of storytellers and their vision of the corporate world. And like I said, it's not worlds I know very much about, but I kind of, most of storytellers I would know would probably put themselves on the left side of the political spectrum. They would, you know, there's a big mistrust of big business and a prejudice of working with, you know, dirty money and the worry of ethics. And I can totally see that point of view, and I can see where the worries would come in. But I also think that one of the things that we do as storytellers, it always seems to me that storytellers kind of, we should be people that are going out into the world and meeting lots and lots of people, and kind of, you know, storytelling is something that we can do to everybody. But and this isn't about individual storytellers. I'm talking specifically maybe about the maybe traditional storytelling community in Britain, that it can be a bit walled off and it can be a bit niche, and it is people telling to people with the same political beliefs, the same worldview, and not really stepping into other places. And you can say that maybe you don't want to take money from places that are going to be, you know, slightly ethically dodgy or whatever, but you don't necessarily know. And a kind of, I don't know if those same people really look into the banks that they bank with and really look into all of the places that they shop with. I'm sure they do to an extent. But surely we can do more by meeting those people than kind of walling ourselves off from them, and actually going into those places with a different view and asking questions is going to be quite a helpful thing to do. It might be a bit tricky at times, but I think that's probably a really positive thing. And I mean, is that something that, I mean, obviously you've been working this for 20 years now, so you'll probably feel quite at home in this, but do you feel that quite often you have a very different worldview from the people that you're working with, and do you enjoy being a bit subversive?
Yes. Okay, so actually later on I want to come back to Vince and also to Ronnie, you know, because there are some things, you know, some really interesting things in the thread. But so the question was, do I feel I've got a different worldview from the people I'm working with? Not really. Because once I get into the, you know, and as I think Ronnie is saying, we can talk about corporations, but and corporates, but actually, what we're doing is we're working in organisations, sort of big or small, and some of them are business, you know, centered organisations, and some of them are not. You know, Ronnie, you're saying you work with a beleaguered NHS trust. So I would prefer to say organisations in a way, although I know your question is specifically about corporate and the different values. Mainly because stories are about people, and there's certainly the way I use storytelling is a lot about values, personal and human values are very much in the centre of them. Everybody has the same, you know, the same or similar values. So I think working with a board is slightly different, or, you know, what they call C-suite, you know, the people on the board or the executive committees. Sometimes they are so wealthy, I mean, that it almost, I can't even, but that's my fault, you know, because it's my block. My block is, I find it hard to hear people talking about, you know, the amount of money, the amount of bonus they're going to get in the world we live in. So I find that quite hard. But generally, the people I work with are eager to learn a new skill and unconfident about how they're doing it already and want to be given more confidence. So I'm all for giving people more confidence, especially women. And a lot of the teams are, obviously, a lot of the teams are women, but as particularly want to give women more confidence in speaking out, giving their opinion, presenting, holding an opinion in front of others, which is a lot of what storytelling is. You know, and if they're painting a picture along the way and they're getting more confident in doing that, because it's going to be engaging people, then I'm all for it. It's probably not a very full answer, but I think it's rare for me to come across an individual or a group of people who are obnoxiously against my lefty leanings. Of course, the whole business flavor might be, you know, it might be that it's an oil company or a, you know, I don't work really with oil companies or other companies like that. I'm not really invited, to be honest, which is handy. I'm trying to be as honest as possible here.
Yeah, no, completely. And I suppose that's the thing as well. Is what you're talking about is very much team building with organisations, and that is the same in any sort of organisation. And I think an awful lot of us do a lot of that, and I suppose that is a very different thing, because they all have, as you say, different purposes. And so when I think of corporate storytelling, there's a certain amount of working with them on the story that they want to put out in the world, and they're there to make money, and that is basically their purpose, and they want to sell a story to make them more money. And when I have come in touch with those sort of people, I suppose when I work with businesses where actually the only thing that they're interested in is the profit margins and making money, and they don't have a lot of ideals, then it is a very, very different, there's a wide yawning gap between why we do what we do. Needless to say, I haven't done that much of that sort of work. Or any, actually.
I agree with you, but I think when I'm faced with that kind of thing, you know, for example, I've never been invited by a marketing team to go in and teach them how to lie to us. I've not had that experience. I have been asked by, board members, we need to work on our narrative and all of that. And I always take them back to their purpose. I just go, what's your purpose for this communication? Is your purpose to tell the truth, or, but you want to make it engaging? What is the reason? But because I've been facilitating leaders around purpose for a number of years, I mix the two. So I mix my how to develop leaders who have integrity with the storytelling. I don't do, if that's the problem I'm faced with, then I will bring in, I'll basically say, well, that's not the way storytelling. You'll get a short term gain, but it won't be purposeful, really. So yeah.
So do you feel that could you tell us about maybe any moments of triumph where you feel that you have changed people's mind or perspective, or kind of had those moments of revelation and open their eyes?
I did tell a story when you said, do I tell stories within organizations? I was with a group of people who were very much on the wanting to. They were very young and ambitious, and they were in the red, the red stage of initiation, where it's all about achievement, really. And I told the story of Ellis.
Okay, so I know that story, but I'm not sure that other people do.
I love it. It's one of my favorites because it's so relevant. It's an ancient Greek story, and it's about a king who was so greedy. He couldn't contain his greed, and he was always looking, in my story, he's always looking for areas to redevelop in the city. And there's a sacred grove, and he suddenly sees it out of his window, and he's going, oh my goodness, how could I have missed this? So he goes in to redevelop it, and of course it's full of sacred oaks, and he takes to cut a wonderful story short, which I don't particularly want to do, he takes his axe and he cuts into the most sacred oak, and he kills the Hamadryad who lives in there. And of course, Demeter is furious, and she sends word to her cousin, who she never meets, because Demeter is all about abundance, and her cousin is famine. And she sends word and says, I need your help. Come and suck the life out of this man. And so famine comes, and she breathes hunger and famine into this king's mouth when he's asleep. And he goes, and then all his dreams are about starving, and he basically eats his whole kingdom as a result. He eats all the wealth, all the food that's in the whole kingdom, has nothing left except his daughter, very long-suffering daughter. And they set off around the world, and the only way they can eat and get a meal is by him selling his daughter. It's a charming man at every town they come to. So she she's had a bit of history with Poseidon in the past. I appear to be telling the story a bit more than I meant to, but anyway, it's a story of greed and corruption and the comeuppance. Anyway, she says, "Help me," to Poseidon. "You owe me one," because Poseidon has had his way with her earlier on, and so he gives her the skill of transforming herself whenever she wants to. So basically, they go into this kind of scam, this grift, if you like, where they go into a town. He sells her. As soon as the person she's sold to turns his back, she turns herself into into an animal, like a pony or or a fox or a sheep or something. Erysiphon gets his meal, and she trots down the road and meets him when she's ready, good and ready. And so they continue for a while, and she gets to really enjoy transforming into these. She gets a taste for it. And one day she goes down the road, and he says, "That wasn't enough. It wasn't enough." And he's sucking the gravy off his thumb, and he accidentally bites into it, and he tastes his own blood, and it's so delicious. So he continues sucking his blood, and then he starts biting at his thumb, and basically he eats his whole hand, and then he eats his whole arm, his other hand, his other arm, his toes, his legs. He eats his whole body. He's such a consumer, and there's nothing left on the ground except a jaw clacking in the dust. And so his daughter looks at it, and then in my version she kicks it into the ditch. And then she looks down the road, and she thinks, well, I could go back home, and spend the rest of my life punishing myself for the sins of my father and propitiating Demeter, or I could go on, So in that Thelma and Louise moment, she goes on. She eventually meets Odysseus, his grandfather. And so trickster and trickster, shapeshifter and trickster. Anyway, so apologies for telling that story, but it's a story about greed and corruption, and I love it, and it does make people think, because I will afterwards say to you were asking about my triumph. Sorry, I completely lost the thread of where we were.
Always happy to have a story.
And they were quite quiet after they'd heard that, and they did say, it did make them think, and there was sort of much quieter and more sober, and then talking about things in a different way afterwards. And so I did go, yes, after that. So that was a triumph. Otherwise, I get a real kick out of especially women who are making their way up in the managerial, thing, and maybe think they're a bit stuck. The number of women who have imposter syndrome is unbelievable. They just think however well they do, however much they achieve, it's never good enough, and they never deserve a seat at that top table. But I can help them have more confidence, at least in expressing themselves in a voice that's loud enough to be heard. So I love doing that. So that's a big triumph for me. Those are two of the things I can think of.
Sounds fantastic. And Liz is sort of talking about similar work, really, and saying, "Oh, tell us about a time. Tell me about a time you're really proud to do the job that you do," just that restoring morale. And again, it's finding the purpose, isn't it? Kind of, why are you doing this? What brought you here in the first place? What is it that makes you come to work every day? When you've forgotten that, that's when everything goes terribly.
Exactly. Exactly. And actually, you're hitting on the thing which somebody way back, it may have been Vince, I can't remember, way back in the chat, said something about the stories we tell ourselves. So I actually spend, not in my overtly storytelling sessions, but in my other coaching and things, I teach people how to handle the stories we tell ourselves. So the inner commentator that says I'm not worth it, or I have to do this, or else, I have to persuade people or manipulate people, or I have to do this, or else, I'll lose my job, or all this. I help them handle the inner story. And I think that's where purpose comes in. When I said it's about why am I doing it? It's the motivation. If I have a strong purpose, if I have a purpose which is a more, it's a broader, more elevated purpose, which is not just about me, it's also about the impact on the world. Most people want, not everybody, but most people want to have a benign impact. at least on their families and the people they know and the world generally. Hardly anybody goes to work to shaft people. At least they probably do, but I don't really meet them. We've gone way off track, haven't we?
No, I don't think we have. I mean, and this is the beautiful thing about taking the tradition on. It is a space to delve into something, and we're not quite sure where it's going to lead. And it's obviously it's shaped by all of the people that are here, and it is a chance to just take a moment and to think and discuss and talk around a subject that, generally speaking, we don't have the time to do. And I think that they're really important questions, and I always come away from taking this tradition on with having been made to think and kind of looking at something in a slightly different way. And Marie is talking about something you were talking about as well. Kind of, I find that looking at story, then changing the endings or changing the roles around in the story often brings us into a very light-hearted space, but changes our minds and hearts, which is what you're saying about, when you were telling their mythic story and kind of what's that golden future, what is your happy ever after, where do you want this story to head, what is going to be this perfect ending that you're heading towards?
Well, it's great, Maria, doing that, isn't it? Because if you take, when they're hearing their own story coming back to them, if they take 3 chapters and they've got let's say there are 3 groups, one group does the past, all the turmoil or whatever, one does the present, which is really interesting, and then another group invents a bright future. They invent the bright future, and it's always really interesting because by then they're so immersed in their they're so in the story, they're so in their own story that they say things like, well, we need to, if we can't find more water because we're in a desert right now, they're really in it by then. We have to take steps to make do with the water we've got, or, how can we sustain? And then they start thinking in a much broader way, because as we all know, as storytellers, one of the great benefits of story is it interrupts the polarization of thinking. And people very easily get into polarization. But in a story, you can encompass everything, all under the same roof, and then there are the grey areas and the nuances that are all there within the structure of the story. So that's why I find it quite exciting, really, doing that. It's just thinking, oh my goodness, I've actually made a difference here, or have helped them to think in a different way.
Brilliant. Yeah. The power of storytelling, it should be compulsory for every organization, definitely.
Yeah.
It interrupts the automatic, introduces possibilities. That's it. It's so easy to get stuck in a groove, isn't it? And that is, it's like what I was saying about taking the tradition on. I think everybody working, and the more in a treadmill you are, I mean, when he was talking about the NHS, the more that you're just giving and doing and doing and doing, the less time that you have to actually talk to the people that you work with and to just step back and kind of examine what you're doing every day, and if there's better ways and if there's more efficient ways. I mean, a story gives that space, and that is the universal language, isn't it? I mean, I suppose that there are buzzwords in metaphor, but they're more universal. They're ones that maybe not worldwide. Obviously, different cultures have different particular archetypes and different references, but within a specific landmass, you normally have very, definite reference points that everybody can refer to, and it makes it a much more open space and a much more welcoming space, I think.
Well, open and welcoming, and also much more creative, because basically when you get into the realm of storytelling, you're asking, what would happen if, what would happen if that was the case? And so when you can then have a full-on, which I wouldn't be leading, by the way, but a full-on strategy session after a storytelling like that, because you go, oh, there's much more, there are far more options than we had realized. We don't need to, somebody mentioned the word paradigm earlier on, but we don't need to stick to the same old paradigm. But people, we can't, if we're swimming in the water, the same water, it's really hard to also be looking at the water from outside. But in storytelling, you can be looking at the water you're swimming in because you've taken it out of your brain and you've made it into a slightly different shape.
And absolutely, it shouldn't be you leading that strategy session, because the whole point about bringing a consultant in and bringing a storyteller in is to open the door. You don't want it to just like shut again as soon as you've gone.
No.
It should absolutely be them that are leading the strategy session and carrying on and taking that story with them, but with new tools and new possibilities in the future. So I'm kind of looking at the time and knowing there's a limited amount. I know it was.
No, but there's so much more to talk about. Can we have another session?
Well, I will give you a moment if there's things that we've missed out that you want to say that I haven't given you the option to. But I'm also aware, so there are people already working in business here, and there are people that have come from business to storytelling. But given that we've now decided that, you know, every organisation and business needs to have storytelling, we should all be doing it. So if we aren't working with team building and working with organisations and corporate storytelling, how would you recommend people start when it just looks like a massive brick wall? They have no idea how to get in or get to the door. What would you recommend some starting points?
The thing is, my way in, I was already running a team building company with my husband because he's a musician and I'm a performer, and we got together and we went, what have we got that we can do together? So we decided to, it was his idea, run a team building company, and my bit was going to be the story, you know, was thinking of ways, racking my brains and thinking, how are these skills transferable? You know, so I immediately thought of presentation skills, and I thought, you know, my heart dies just thinking about the words presentation skills. But of course, when you get into it, it's not really about that. But we've got, you know, and so my way in was really, you know, like we had a website with lots of different offers on it. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, I think what I would do if I was starting out now would be to create a lot of noise on LinkedIn. Because actually LinkedIn, although dull as ditchwater, you know, in many ways, people do get work through it. And it's become much more in currency now. So I think, you know, giving talks or in organizations, free ones to begin with, you know, about storytelling, just a taster, having blogging on LinkedIn about how important it is, and little snippets about, you know, what you could get from using storytelling. I think that's probably the way I would go in but it wasn't relevant when I first went in. So I wish I could, I don't know how, you know, other than if you've got friends in organizations, say, why don't I come in and give a talk about storytelling for free, and then you can book me. Maybe other people have got better ideas. I think they probably have.
No, and I think that is good, and it is one of those things that we are all individuals. We all got to find our individual way anyway. But while we've got you here to pick your brains, Maria's saying she gets quite a bit of work from LinkedIn. It'd be great if storytelling had its own category rather than you having to
I know, you can't find it, can you? It's mad.
Well, give it time soon. We've got storytelling and equity now. You never know, we might get storytelling on LinkedIn as well.
Yes.
So I did promise that there would be a chance for people to ask questions at the end if I missed them on the chat. So if anybody has got burning questions that they really want to ask, if you want to stick them in the Q&A, this is your time. Looking at trends is another way of getting into an organisation. Brain drain is a huge concern at the moment. So,
what does that mean? Looking at trends.
I suppose just the things that people are talking about. I suppose being on LinkedIn, seeing what people are worrying about at the moment. So you said that we've got so much more to talk about. What did I not ask you today that you really wanted to tell me about?
Let me have a little look. Unless other people want to ask. Yeah, a couple of things. Just, you know, why do I bother to do it? You know, I mean, it's like, because, you know, I said at the beginning, I'm hardly ever asked to do festivals, and it's because I didn't start that way. But if there's anybody out there who's running a festival, I would love to do some festival work. Sorry, that's not what we're not. But what I wanted to say was, you said, did it feed anything back into my understanding? One of the questions we were thinking of, does it feed anything back into my understanding of traditional storytelling? And I was thinking, first of all, I thought no, but actually it does, because it's the more we gauge our audience, so gauging the audience, and which we would do anyway, I know that, but it's just nice to have that constant reminder about, oh my goodness, they don't know what I mean by tension and release, in a way, or it's a revelation to people when you talk about the story arc or the hero's journey, or just the idea of using metaphor. It's really exciting, and I just think it makes me feel more humble, because I think, humble and proud at the same time, because I think, we know a lot as storytellers. We know a lot that's really valuable to the world, but also be really simple and relevant. Come back, pull back, be very simple, be very relevant. So I think it does feed those kinds of insights, or reminders really, for how to tell stories. Because I tend to, if I'm telling a long form story, then I will quite indulge my storytelling, make the links, everybody, rather than making the links for people. But sometimes the links need to be made for people, I think, is the answer to that. Yeah, the rewards of doing it. I think it's just working. It's so refreshing to work with people who aren't in the storytelling community, as it were. They don't know what you're doing. And yeah, it's rewarding to be working outside the realm of storytelling and bringing it to new audiences.
Well, and this is the big thing, when you kind of go for an arts council grant or anything, then kind of developing the audience is always the key, and we have to be doing that all of the time, because we need to expand the world of storytelling. But it can be tricky, and it's daunting, and it's scary, but when you do it, it is incredibly rewarding. One of the things that when we were having a bit of chat about what were things that we might cover, that has really stuck with me was you were talking about being asked to teach PowerPoint training. PowerPoint presentations. And I know, do you want to talk about, I'll say I talk about that a little bit.
Sorry, what I can't remember what
I can talk for you then.
Yeah. So you
just the bits that stuck with me, because it really feeds in. Again, it's talk about new audiences. So I do a lot of work with Lead Creative Schools in Wales, and it's very much about risk taking and doing new things, and using your skills to go into new area, and you follow children where they want to go. So I end up teaching things I have no idea about, because that's what the children want to do. But what I bring then is my creative outlook and my knowledge of being an artist and how you be a creative person. And you were talking about kind of when you're first starting out and working your way into organizations, being asked to deliver PowerPoint training, going, I don't know how to do PowerPoint.
Well, it's one thing, it's hard enough to use it yourself, but to teach people how to use it.
So there you were on your YouTube videos and everything, kind of figuring out and then going in and teaching it. And on one side of the coin, you then think, well, why would they want me to go and do PowerPoint? Because there's people who actually know lots and lots and lots about PowerPoint, and it should be somebody like that. But by asking you to do that, you don't know it inside out. So you're talking on a much more basic level, and you don't skip all of those really important foundation building bricks.
Absolutely.
A lot of people who really know PowerPoint but aren't teachers just skip over. But that's also great. You're going to be thinking about presentation as much or more than PowerPoint. So somebody who is really into PowerPoint is going to do something really glossy and beautiful, and the slides are going to look amazing, and then they're going to talk you through it and read out every slide exactly what they've written on the slide, while everybody just kind of exactly Liz is saying, death by PowerPoint. We've all been there.
I mean, that was a big learning curve for me doing that. I was in India doing it with a finance team in India. Teaching them how do you do a PowerPoint? How do you use storytelling? Well, you're a storyteller. Teach us how to do a PowerPoint presentation. And you're absolutely right, Amy. I had to, I Googled it. I looked it up. I watched, and I boiled it down to like 4 things. So I taught them how to be a storyteller. How to structure the presentation, and basically just try to spend most of the time trying to get them off reading the PowerPoint slides and just say, you can put a picture of a flower behind you, whatever reminds you of the bit that you're going to do next or is slightly illustrative. The simpler, the better. And what I learned from my investigation into YouTube was we can only read 6 things on a slide at once. Anything more than 6, and it becomes, befuddlement. And of
I'm
course,
a storyteller. I would probably go 3.
yeah, exactly.
I struggle with more than 3. 3 is
Yeah,
good.
yeah, 3 is
And
good. So those, and I was thinking, is this good enough? But my goodness, it was a revelation.
and I think that is the thing. I think that as storytellers, we've been taught so much by the stories that we tell, and that is the thing, that's traditional stories. We've been taught by myth, we've been taught by story, that we have empathy, and we have the ability to see a situation, as you said, from the overview and from all the people who are swimming in it and from those different points of view. And you can come in and teach somebody a skill like PowerPoint or anything else that they might know better, but you bring such a different perspective and such a different way of looking at things, that you're teaching it from a completely opposite angle, that it's going to shine a light where there's normally a shadow. And that is going to work both ways, because then you're going to see how they would normally do it and all the bits that you wouldn't normally see. And I mean, I would think that's always the point of bringing a consultant in, and what would make storytellers particularly good consultants is just such a different view and perspective and way of bringing things together than I think would normally be the way of looking at things in organizations and businesses. And I'm very excited that you are working in organizations, that Ronnie is, that Maria is, that Liz is, and all the other people here who do, because it just seems such an incredibly valuable service.
Yeah.
And again, it's just one of those things about making everything a bit more human.
Yes, and to loop round to your first question, in a way, when people say, could you bring storytelling to us? It's like they're reaching out a paw. I always think it's like reaching out a paw and going, we need quite a lot here, because you're going to teach them confidence, how to speak, so I bring all the skills I learned when I was acting, how to hold yourself, how to be confident in front of people, never mind presentation and PowerPoint and structuring a whole thing, and having a purpose for doing it. So it's a vast subject, and the only thing is just finding out where they want you to go in. What is it that they think they need the most, and then broadening out from there, I would say.
Thank you so much, Dawn. As you said, there's always so many more little places to dig into and to examine, but it's given me lots to think about, and it made me feel much more positive about the whole thing as well. And it's just been invigorating and inspiring and interesting, and it's been absolutely fantastic to have you as my guest. So if you have enjoyed tonight, or being challenged by tonight, or hope you've all stayed till the end, which is always a good sign, but please go and find out more about Dawn's work, and then you can find some of the other things that she might have talked about, and certainly some of the things that she does. Her website is www.storytellinghq.com, and I'm going to do all the blurfy stuff now, Dawn. So I'm going to spotlight myself so that you don't have to look bored while
And I'll just say thank you, Amy. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been such a blast and so lovely to talk. So thank you.
Oh, well, and there's so much love coming in on the chat. Everybody's sort of saying thank you so much, Dawn, and loads of love there for you. So that is pretty much it for tonight. Just a little bit of wrapping up. If you have enjoyed tonight, as I said, there's lots of other episodes of Taking the Tradition on all sorts of different topics to do with storytelling on the YouTube channel, Taking the Tradition On. And you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and you can find Dawn on Facebook and Instagram as well. And I will be back next month. So Taking the Tradition On is always the first Tuesday of the month. And the next one is Tuesday, the 6th of June, with Richard Hamilton, telling the world about story. Richard Hamilton is a journalist, he's an author and a broadcaster. He spent years working for the BBC World Service, 25 years plus, including as correspondent in Madagascar, South Africa and Morocco. And in Morocco, he discovered and fell in love with the incredible rich storytelling tradition that they have there, but also at the same time saw how close it was to literally dying out, as all of the old traditional masters were getting on the edge of life and just when starting to die from old age. And he started recording their stories, and as much as he could about the art, wrote a book about it. And actually things have become much more positive since then. There is an amazing new generation of storytellers coming up in Morocco. It's very exciting what's happening with the tradition there. But he'll be talking about that, his work recording and publishing, and stories on the radio, and how traditional stories captivated a World Service journalist and led him to collect and curate those stories in print, but also as an online archive, the House of Stories. So that's what's coming up next month. But for now, good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending where you are in the world. And thank you very much for helping me and my guest, Dawn Ellis, to take the tradition on. Thank you.